County Council meeting's now in session. I'll give the invocation pledge of allegiance. You'd stand with me? Our Heavenly Father, bless this council as we do the business of the citizens of York County. Help us to work together as a team to make the right decisions at the right time. In your name, amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our first order of business is oath of office. When I call your name, if you'd come forward so our county attorney, Mr. Kendrick, can swear you in. Alan Chatham and Barbara Candler, if I said it correctly. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Barbara. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you for serving. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you for serving. Appreciate you serving.
Let's see, under appearances, at the RFATS meeting last time, Mr. Hooper presented a collector street plan, and I thought it would be good for the whole council to hear this. So, David, if you would educate this council.
All right, well, good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of council.
And
Dr.
remember, give
Blackwell,
your name, David, remember, give your name and address for Karen, or she's going to.
Of course, David Hooper, 155 Johnston Street, Rock Hill. Okay. At our March meeting, we talked about collector street planning and what it can do for all the challenges that we see, both currently as well as what is projected. And I'd like to kind of walk through that a little bit more detail if I can tonight. Let's see here, make sure I'm not missing that.
Is this a presentation you can send us?
Yes, sir.
Oh, very good, that'd be nice. I guess I didn't ask the question, will you do that?
Thank you. Okay. All right, so tonight I'd like to talk about 4 items in particular. The transportation network itself, the important land use transportation connection, network connectivity, and then of course the development of the collector street plan itself. Now, for those who may be less familiar with the RFATS area, here it is on the screen. You've got a planned area population within RFATS of about 230,000 currently and growing. In the next 8 years, that number is projected to be at 305. You've got a couple of different colors in the RFATS area. Those are urbanized areas. They are what bring this type of an organization into being. In the area I'll call gold there in the center, you've got the Rock Hill small urbanized area. The tan area up in TUK, Fort Mill, Lake Wylie, and the Panhandle is the extension of the Charlotte large urbanized area across the state line. And then all the way on the western edge above Clover, you see a dark brown section. That's the extension of the Gaston urbanized area, which we call the Gaston Finger, that's crossed over the state line and has about 200 residents itself. So you've got a couple of interesting dynamics going on in the planning area, all on its own, separate from the growth that we're all dealing with. Now, And focusing on the transportation network, you know, when we think of roads, when we talk about roads, there are different layers among roads, and they do different things by design. There at the top, we've got our arterial roadways. These are the 160s, the Gold Hills, the Celanese, the Cherry Roads of the world. And those by design are to carry higher volumes for accommodating longer trip lengths and most often to get people to and from I-77. That next level down are collector streets. Now these are roads that carry lower volume and are designed to carry shorter trips, not longer duration trips. Then of course that third level are our local roads. This is where our houses are at. And of course you've got the highest degree of land access and of course the lowest level of volume and speed, hopefully. Now, this is a very important set of slides here. You know, through the transportation planning process, we do something called regional travel demand modeling, which is another way of saying we look at all the land use practices in the RFATS planning area. We look at all the undeveloped tracts. We look at where development is occurring. We look at changes in population. And then we run the model and we say, show me the operational outcome of all those things. That slide on your left, it says 2015. That's basically where we stand now. And here you see moderate congestion levels on I-77. You see severe congestion over in Lake Wylie on 49. You see congestion on Celanese leading into I-77. You see it there on 21. You see red, although smaller, on the Fort Mill Southern Parkway. And then you see it red up there at Carowinds. Now there are other areas where there are peak points of congestion, but that's basically what we see right now. When we look forward over the next 10, 20, and 30 years, based upon everything we know as of today, this is what we're projecting is going to be the operational outcome. This is a transformation in terms of the driver experience. And you see this throughout the RFATS area. You see it all the way over in the Panhandle there on 521. And what that essentially means is, you know, when we look at those areas that have not developed and are expected to develop, we look at the types of developments that are envisioned and the projected growth in population, you're going to see very real challenges on all our major arterial roadways, that first layer I talked about. And in some ways, that's a good thing. If you've got an economically dynamic, robust environment, people want to be associated with that area. They want to live there, but there are operational consequences. But what we're looking at is a real shift on those major arterial roadways during the morning and evening peak period. Now, I know I'm going to cover a lot of information. I'll try to do it in a timely manner, but if you have a question that comes to mind, please just let me know as we're going through it. Yes, ma'am.
So, according to this model under 2015, we're saying that the yellow line there, the dark gold, that's considered mild congestion.
Yes, ma'am. Now, you'll have
That's
points.
based upon the model, not what the public thinks.
Correct.
That's based upon the model that's
Correct.
created.
We look at it and say, for a certain number of lanes, this is what the capacity should be as a general proposition. Now, in any one day, you can have a series of accidents, and that could not be gold, but red. And you could just be sitting there idling. So the driver experience is going to deviate from the model, but just as a general proposition, this is the level of volume we expect to see. Okay, let me go ahead and go forward. Now, the land use transportation connection and why that is so important, but sometimes unfortunately overlooked. You know, when we talk about this connection, I mean, this is where we're talking about land use patterns. We're talking about undeveloped parcels in particular, and how that relates to the transportation network and those different layers I talked about earlier. And there's a key relationship there. You know, often when we're dealing with traffic congestion, sometimes we get frustrated and say, I wish the transportation system was functioning better. The transportation system is a reflection of the collective land use decisions in any area. The transportation experience is the operational outcome of the land use decisions that are made. And so when we talk about trying to focus in on collector street planning, one of the reasons this has become a hot topic at RFATS and why we would like to kind of highlight and focus here is that this is a tool that we can use to proactively reduce long-term traffic congestion as additional development occurs. You think back to that slide I just showed you. This is an opportunity to try to make some ground in that area. Now, here's kind of an illustration of a traditional residential development. And when I'm talking about collector roads, it's those dark dotted lines in the center I'm talking about. That when we look at residential development, if we don't have these roads in every development that's out there, it makes the transportation system, particularly on our arterial roadways, less efficient than it can be. It won't make it perfect, but it makes it less efficient than it should be. And so what we're saying is we'd like to put greater emphasis on the importance of these collector roads and make sure that before developments are approved going forward, that this is very much a part of the planning on the front end of the process before the yes is given, so that we can get the best outcome possible. So now when we kind of take a step back out and look at the RFATS area, you know, it's the darker lines, it's those arterial roadways that really stand out, and that's what really gets our attention, because that's where congestion is the highest. Those are the routes we take to and from our work very often, to the interstate, and that's what we focus on. But we really need to kind of keep in mind that it's these other layers where we have another opportunity to move the needle in the right direction, not only for current conditions, but what we see coming over the next 3 decades. And this is very, very important, particularly in some parts of the county, particularly in Lake Wylie is one area, Tioga and Fort Mill, just to give you a reference point. Over the next 10 years, you're projected to grow at north of 50% from where you are today, just over the next 10 years. 10 years after that, you are still expected to be in the low double digits. And so I cite that just as an example of what's coming and why we need to be looking for other tools to help supplement our current efforts. Now, network connectivity. This is another way of looking at this. You know, how we structure land uses directly impacts the efficiency of the system and the experience drivers have. You know, very often that development pattern on the left is what's desired. People like cul-de-sac streets. The hope is that you'll have lower volumes, more places for the kids to play, and it has more of a sense of identity, okay? But, and there's some merit to some of those arguments, but there's an operational trade-off. There's a planning trade-off that city and county and town councils are making with that type of development. And it's important that we're clear on this point, that when we approve things with that structure, it has some benefits to it, but it has some operational drawbacks. Now, if you shift over to the right, you've got a different structure there. Now, if you're at the school, using the example there, you don't have to go out onto the major arterial roadway in order to go down to get to the market or to another place within that grid. You can completely stay off the arterial roadways for a shorter distance trip and still get to your destination. And that's only important just as a general planning principle, but for an area that has the growth pressures that we're facing, this will take on increased importance. Yes, sir.
And I think I've seen this in the few years I've been on council, because we've talked about this before, but the thing you hear from the public, at least in that neighborhood, is they don't want that traffic coming through their neighborhood or on their street.
I can tell you, sir, I've heard, I'll put it this way. I have had people in public meetings say to me, I understand the concept at a big picture level. I understand
It's
your
not my
argument.
neighborhood.
This is not mine.
Yes, sir. They say, your collector road is my cut-through traffic. And on one level, I get that. The challenge that I kind of try to work through when I hear that argument, and on one level, it's fair, because there's always going to be a certain segment of the population that's going to push the limits, they're going to drive faster than they should, and they're going to use residential streets. My response is the whole purpose of collector streets is to give them a designated route so they won't do that. Because if their only alternatives are A and B, either I go on the arterial roadway or I cut down your street. What I'm saying is position the network so there's a third option. Put them on collector streets and get them off the residential streets as much as you can.
But David, and to that point, Robert, that's number one phone call I get.
Yeah.
Carroll Woods, I mean, I can just roll through, also, name it in Regent Park. People do not like it when you're cutting through their neighborhood. They lose their minds. But if this was actually used as a planning tool as well, as opposed to having homes face this connector road, the homes could face in a different direction. Therefore, my children aren't playing in that connector road, which is my number one problem when people are running through it at really probably 35, but they should be going 20. And so part of this, I have an advantage because I saw this last month, and I've been thinking about it, is us incorporating a network where we require this, but then we also say to you, but you don't get to just load it with house, which has driveway. You just turn them a different way. Just turn them in a different direction so that this is we do have better connectivity. Now, it doesn't work with existing neighborhoods, and it's a real problem, but this is a lesson that might fix York when my growth gets to you. I mean, that's how I view this.
Okay. All right, if there are no more questions here, let me go ahead and go forward. Kind of focus on the development of the Collector Street plan itself and what was involved. Now, fundamentally, what we're trying to do, as I've been outlining, in developing the Collector Street plan is to get a more complete functional network so we can proactively reduce traffic congestion before it fully develops. And while it may be hard to believe, not all the congestion we're going to see is already with us. There's more coming. Okay. A good way to think of collector roads, I found, is along these lines. If the arterial roads are the bones, and say the tissue and the meniscus are the local roads, the ligaments are the collector roads. And what I'm saying is we need to make sure there's enough ligaments out there to support the ever-increasing levels of demand. Remember when we saw that other map with all the red? We see that coming on the arterials. What I'm saying is we need to beef up the ligaments where we're missing some spots, where we've got undeveloped tracks, and say, rather than wait until a problem materializes, let's incorporate it on the front end. And as you look at development proposals, think about where should that line be drawn? How can it fit with what's being proposed? How can we try to proactively address it and get a more complete network out there on the front end when it's cheaper, when it makes more planning sense? Now, just as a point of reference, here's a couple of examples of collector roads. You may have driven down many of these and may not have made the association that this is a collector road. Sutton Road is a collector. Dam Road, TKK, collector and growing. Reservation Road, George Dunn Road, over by the Indian Nation. Ely's Creek Road, another. Let me kind of stop there. Now, you saw a number of different roadways. Collector roads can be 2 lanes, 3 lanes, 4 lanes. They're not all the same size, but they perform a very similar function of basically gathering up all the traffic from residential development and channeling it in the most efficient way that it can. Let me kind of go into some of the specifics of how we developed this plan. Of course, as with all planning processes, we looked at all the existing plans that are out there that would be relevant, all the land use plans, the comprehensive plans, modeling that we do. We've also looked at where there are environmental features and conflicts to where new roadways would be potentially set. We had field visits conducted, held a series of meetings all over the RFETS area, and then basically mapped out. Here's all the existing roadways of all types. Here's all the roadways that are planned from all sources, RFETS, pennies, Department of Transportation, everything. And then we said to the consultant team and the others, now let's draw some lines on the map. In those undeveloped tracks, where could some potential collector roads go? And what types might they be? 2-lane, 3-lane, 4-lane, that kind of thing. Now, I'm going to show you a series of maps of those lines on the map. And they're at the bottom. I really want to take a moment and stress this, because this tends to get the most attention. These lines are illustrative links. They are not exact alignments. They're not designed to be lines in the sand that have to be adhered to. This is a flexible approach or we want, in effect, say to the local jurisdictions, just take this into account when you sit down with a development proposal and look at it and see how it can work and make the appropriate adjustments so that you get the right operational outcome. They're not exact alignments. Now, the first map here is up in the TDK Fort Mill area. And you'll see lots of different things out there. Most of them, I'll give you a minute to just kind of look at that and digest what you're seeing. Now, does this have the red light capability? It's a line. There we go. Okay. Thank you very much. So you'll see a number of lines here and areas to kind of fill in, and they don't really stand out, but there's a couple of unique lines on this map, and I want to put them in their proper context. You know, we'd said to the consultant team, as you draw these lines, we want you to look and outline the obvious connections between developments and fill in the network. And then we said to them, now we want you to think outside the box. We want you to look at the really hard decisions. If you were getting very, very creative, what might you identify? And there were 3, and they're all in this area. One is right up here. You look there at 51. They talked about what if you had something that flew over the interstate to the other side so that everyone from Pleasant Road didn't have to go up to Carowinds and add into that and go over. Could you conceivably do something there? That's something that they'd kind of put on the radar screen. That has some challenges, as all of these do. They're going from one type of land use to another, I think from residential to light industrial, and as a general matter, you don't want to do that. But we asked them to say, if you were to think outside the box and just kind of get creative, what might come to mind? And that's something they put out there. The other was, let me go back. There we go. The other was right here. You see the Greenway. There's a line coming through, and it's based on the premise that you would put in a new interchange at Colthorpe, which that has been a separate discussion all on its own. That when we think of the development at Kingsley, we think of the development of the former Knight Stadium, you think of the demand level at Gold Hill and 160. Trying to space in an interchange at Colthorpe has its own basis to it, and a fairly strong one. But if you were going to make it work and not add more traffic onto 160 and Gold Hill, you'd need another way to feed people in. And so they identified that as one of those unique options. I say very bluntly, I have no illusions about these types of projects. These are not easy. They are involved, but we wanted to ask the question. The third is right here. Many members are familiar with a long-standing discussion about a potential additional bridge crossing between Mount Gallant and Sutton, and I won't spend a lot of time here. I think we've received fairly clear direction on this. But when we asked them the question, this is something they came back with again. They basically said what has been discussed before, that we're missing a link in the network. Okay, so as you kind of look at these lines, I want you to put those 3 unique lines on one side, and then there's everything else. And it's the everything else I'm really asking you to focus on. Let me go ahead and stop there and see if there are any initial questions that come to mind based upon what you're seeing.
How much longer can we hold out on not doing that bridge over, or connecting on Mount Gallant? It's been a real contentious topic.
Yes, yes, sir, it has. And it's one of the challenges that we face. If I just take a step back, just big picture, and say, when you look at the RFATS area here, you've got Lake Wiley up here, and then you've got Celanese over. You've got an L shape, and you've got Buster Boyd Bridge and your other bridge here. And then in between this, you have nothing. Okay. That, you've got long stretches where you're channeling all of your demand. That's hard. That's hard. And I think, you know, at RFATS, we've kind of wrestled with this and worked through it and said, we understand that you're missing a link there, but there are concerns. There are concerns about the distribution of traffic, about the demand that would be put on Sutton, whether Sutton by design can accommodate that. You've had additional development activity there at Mason's Bend. Trying to find the right link is a challenge. It's also an expensive one. Most of the bigger projects are. But in answer to your question, You know, I don't know that there is an easy answer here. Being absolutely honest, I don't know that there is, because what we're dealing with as staff, all of you as members of council, is we're dealing with a built environment that's been developed over, 50, 60 years operationally, where it's really taken off. And you can't change that. You can't undo it. It's sort of like we don't have a blank painter's canvas where we get a clean slate. We have to take the built environment as it is and then position it to respond to what we see is coming. I guess I'd try to answer you that way. I apologize if it's incomplete, but.
I was hoping you said there was a better option somewhere else, but.
Well, we've looked at it. I don't know if there is, sir.
Thank you.
David, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So, and I don't know who the question is for, so I'm just gonna not look at anybody for a minute. Where does the RFATS line and the planning and zoning line intersect? Like, when we're looking at this, I know we have a RFATS committee, but at what point does our planning and zoning say, yeah, we wanna build neighborhoods like this and like, when you go back to that neighborhood, how does that get from you to physically a plan where we say, we'd like to recommend this to you?
Well, there's a couple of ways that happens. There's a technical committee that will look at what we call developments of regional impact, where they may bring something to us. But for things that are on a smaller scale, as a general matter, MPOs do not insert themselves in the local decision-making process. We can make recommendations of what we think is advisable, but ultimately it's the local jurisdictions that make that judgment, and MPOs don't have the ability to compel a response. We can say, based upon what we're seeing, this is what it would make sense to do, and we would encourage you to look at this and consider applying it, but you don't have a clear intersection where MPOs get more directly involved. Your staff, if you will, sit on our technical committee. So we have, for example, people from your pennies program, from your planning department. They sit there and will discuss issues. If they see things that are unique within their work area, they might ask questions and get feedback from other members and say, how are you dealing with it? What is the response here? What makes sense? That type of interaction occurs all the time. But a more formal sort of intersection.
And where does the money come from to do a connector road like that?
That can come from a couple of different sources. It depends on how it's approached. Fundamentally, it should be done in partnership with members of the development community, by identifying where you think those collector roads should be, and then perhaps maybe having them pay or build a proportional share of the road, depending on how developed the area is. If they're the newest person out there and it's largely undeveloped, you might do another arrangement where it may not be warranted at that point. But you're really fundamentally looking to partner with the development community. Now, if you get a collector road that's on a much larger scale, where it would be well beyond the proportional responsibility of the developer, then you may look at other sources of funding, but usually you're at a much higher level in those cases. Any other questions?
What was the difference in you had some little red dotted lines and some little blue dotted lines. What were the difference in those on that map?
Okay, certainly. The blue lines are basically proposed two-lane roadways. You've got orange, which is 2 and a median. The green, which may be a little hard to see here, are 3 lanes. And then I believe the red are 4 with a median. And basically how we arrived at that is we looked at that travel demand modeling process and said, what are the volumes now? What are they projected to be? And then spoke with the local jurisdiction staff and said, when do you think that will develop? And then plotted out the type of facility that would most likely be needed. Okay.
What is local jurisdiction staff?
Oh, I'm sorry. That's I'm talking. When I say that, it's City of TUK, City of
Okay.
Rock Hill, Town of Fort Mill.
Thought maybe there's a group I didn't know about.
Can you, going back to that, I think it was where you had the gold lines, the 2015 and 2045 projection. So I guess my question is on 2015. Again, we've established that that's not from a consumer, that's not going to be our current resident's perspective. That's based upon the numbers that you have established as what you think the road can hold.
Yes, ma'am.
That it's minor. in the 2045, is that projection based upon current, what is that based on?
It's based
What
on.
development does that, I mean,
It's basically taking the available land that's undeveloped in an area and then getting the input from your staff over the type, how it's zoned, the type of development you're going to have there, because, and then extrapolating out the number of vehicle trips that will be there. If you've got an apartment complex, it may be one thing. If it's single-family residential, you can assume a different trip rate, and then we basically aggregate that and plot that out, and then basically run it, and that's what you see. Now, in
so
terms
you would
of,
have gotten information from our staff to help
Oh, yes.
arrive at this 2045?
oh yes, in fact, because of the growth that we see within the region, I actually send out folks to sit down with everyone's staff every year.
So in terms of, I would assume that what we would have sent to you is what is in the comp plan, what is in the county's comp plan. So are you saying that if we follow our comp plan, if we go outside our comp plan, it would be even more congested? Am I right in that?
Right, I think that takes us kind of in a different area. I don't focus as much on whether it's in compliance with the comp plan per se. That's kind of a separate planning question. What I'm looking at is that we'll sit down with staff and say, give us your best estimate of what you think is going to happen on the ground based upon your comp plan, based upon what you see happening, because sometimes you'll see a divergence. They may get a unique proposal or other things, and they want to certainly take account of that.
I guess I'm just confused if what we're trying to do is work together and to come up with a land use model that puts us in a situation that helps look out for our folks that are driving on these roads, then I would think that we would at least need to know what is it that we're basing the decisions on if it's not the comp plan, because that's how we base our decisions is on what we've approved in the comp plan. So is there some way that we could get the information from you as to what the projections are based on?
Well, I want to make sure we're talking about the same thing. We're getting our projections from your staff, and they're basing that off of what would assume to be your comp plan, which is they're going to look and say, what is the land use in a particular area? How many units we think are going to be there? And then we feed that into the model. So, I mean, we are going to your own staff and getting this information. They would have no other source, frankly, to draw from other than the comp plan.
I see you nodding your head. We can get that. We can get the information just to make sure.
Yes, ma'am. Well, I mean, we can verify that, but to Mr. Hooper's point, the 2045 model is going to reflect not current land, it's not going to reflect current land uses, but operating on the assumption that in compliance with the comp plan, which doesn't go out to 2045, those properties will have developed in accordance with the comp plan. So for instance, if you look at it, employment centers, or if you look at single-family development, multifamily development, and the trips that those typically generate would have all been fed into this particular model to give us the volume that is presented in the 2045 model. But if you want me to verify that, yes, in fact, it wasn't current zoning, but future land use, assuming that it was mapped out, I can verify that, but I can't imagine that would have been opposite of that.
Yeah, if I can just get whatever we would have provided so that I can understand from my perspective in my district what information we're providing to arrive at that.
So I have another question.
Yes, ma'am. We go forward.
That map, the one you were almost, the one, yeah. So I have to go by the thing that I'm most familiar with on this map, and that's that red over there on Highway 49. So in the next 30 years, that doesn't look like it shows it getting much worse. I'm like, that needs to be like maybe flashing at this point. So I guess my question is, when we already have a road that is red like that, and this was back to kind of my other question, is at what point, I mean, maybe council is who makes this happen, but at what point do we say, we've already got an issue here, and maybe we need to do something, maybe we need to look at what you're saying with the neighborhoods and things. I mean, how do we, there's nothing on this map that shows me that road's gonna get worse in the next 10, 20, 30 years, but I know it is. So there's nothing on these drawings that really shows me anything that I don't already know, and I think it actually shows me less than I already know, and that's my concern.
Well, I'd probably characterize it this way. You know, you're at red, and you remain at red, so it's, you know, if we liken this to being in class or in school, you have an F. We don't have an F minus. You know,
So we're already as bad as it gets. That's the point.
From a modeling classification, yes.
Okay, so I would think that we would try to do something now to try and eliminate as much of the red over here. I mean, in other words, I don't want to look at this and say, oh, well, this is what it's going to look like in 2045, and I don't think it'll take it that long, but, you know, for me, just looking at the thing that I'm most familiar with, I would think, well, gosh, you know, why do we want the rest of the county to look like, why do we want the rest of the county to fail? We've got one little, we got a couple students failing, why do we want the whole class to fail? So what do we do? You know, I guess this is a county management or council question, what do we do to prevent all the whole county being an F grade? That's why I said I wasn't gonna look at anybody, because I don't think you have the answer to that.
No, ma'am.
I think, and I'll just point this out, when you talk about 49 is severe congestion today.
Yeah,
It will be severe congestion in 2045. But look at the roads around 49 and how they change from traffic flowing adequately now to either severe or moderate over that time. It's not, I think we often, and I get caught up in it, we get caught up in looking at 49, 160, Gold Hill, 21, 77. We're looking at, and Celanese, and we're looking at these major roads. They're already choking down from our standpoint. Now, this study is trying to say, if the only way we'll keep all these other things from turning that red is to build a whole secondary connector system that allows us to get from point A to point B without ever having to touch 160, without ever having to touch 49. And I think that's where this is driving, and that's, and I think when Britt and I talked after the meeting, and he said he was gonna bring this forward, was so that perhaps this council could adopt this connector study, and we could then ask our planning department to incorporate it into all future planning models. And as we're laying out neighborhoods and as we're laying out the grid system from this way forward, we will have built-in a back channel connector. It's as simple as making one guy's neighborhood, he has to draw a connector road and he has to stub it out on his property line. So when the next one comes in, he can stub it in on his. I mean, but we're not doing that now. And I think that, so the point of, you know, the chairman asking this to happen today was so that we could all say, this is important, let's pass a let's adopt this study and then make it implemented at a planning level.
Well, and I think, if I may, Mr. Johnson, that's what your thoroughfare plan is going to do. In conjunction with this connectivity study that RFAS has done, our thoroughfare plan is actually going to give us teeth to do exactly those things. To go in there and say, developer X, you must stub out here. This intersection is failing. You must do these kind of things. Right now, we can kind of loosely point back to a 2045 plan that says, well, we really do need to do these things. With a thoroughfare plan that we've been working on will give us that hammer that's needed that would allow your problems to be distributed equally across the whole road network system, and that's what we're looking to do. But from a land use perspective, it's going to require decisions like increased density or making the developers pay a little bit more, which I know that this particular council may not have a problem with, but that it's going to require those kind of decisions that allow for that to happen.
Connectivity.
If I'm not incorrect, and I could be, but I believe in the last year and a half or so, when we've redone some of our zoning, we've added some requirements for some of the developed areas to have those stubbed out streets and different things into some of our master development areas.
That's right. Yes, sir.
So we're also gonna need all the municipalities
Yeah.
to do this. The county can do whatever it wants, but if the municipalities don't pass something very similar to this, this will all be moot, because it won't matter what we do.
Go ahead, David.
Yes, sir. I go ahead and go back to the series of maps. All right, so there was Fort Mill and TUK. Let me kind of shift down. That kind of goes into the Panhandle. Let me kind of goes back into York County. This is Central Rock Hill. This is where, let's see, you've got Dave Lyle coming in. The consultant team did identify the Dave Lyle Boulevard extension as something they thought from a network standpoint made sense, and they did reflect that here as well. you've got a much more developed collector road system here, so you don't see as many new lines. You see a few kind of moving south along I-77 mostly. Kind of go forward. Gives you a little bit bigger picture there. And then up in Lake Wiley. Okay. I know we've kind of covered a lot there. Any additional questions come to mind? Okay, if not, let me kind of go forward. You know, here's the four typical sections for collector streets. There on the upper left, you've just got the traditional two-lane collector. Over there to the right, the two-lane with divided with a median. In the lower left, you've got a three-lane here. And then, of course, last, you've got a four-lane divided here. So, you know, as you think of collector roads, they come of all sizes to serve the right purpose in the right area. Now, getting back to a comment you made earlier about cut-through traffic. You know, most people have heard of the term traffic calming, and traffic calming is a part of this, which says where you get people who are pushing the limits and doing things that needs to be approached through putting in additional treatments on certain roadways where it makes sense to slow down those who are otherwise disinclined to do so on their own. You can either approach this through increased enforcement or you can do it through traffic calming. But that goes hand in hand with collector road planning as well.
And I believe we added some traffic calming into our rezoning a year or so ago.
Yes, sir. And to that extent also, staff is submitting to council for their consideration in the budget, money to review and rewrite the subdivision code, chapter 154. And these sorts of traffic would give council the tools and staff the tools it needs to make this a reality.
And as Mr. Johnson noted a few moments ago, effective implementation. If you're really going to get at this on a countywide level, you want all the participants to adopt and apply this and incorporate it into their own development review and approval process. That's where you're going to get the most beneficial outcome, because it's a network and they are connected. And if one does it and the other doesn't, you can get misalignment and other things, and you can not get at the underlying objective that we're after. Now, a couple of just last thoughts here. You know, this plan is designed to help you preserve a collector streets system by basically saying this is where we think there needs to be connectivity, working with the developers, and making sure it's done, as I said earlier, on the front end. One of the ways you can do that is requiring developers to dedicate the right-of-way for these identified collector streets, where you saw those lines on the map. And of course, I think as Mr. Johnson also highlighted, requiring the stub-outs all the way up to the property line. This can be something that's sometimes overlooked, where they don't go all the way out and then you get the adjacent parcel develops and you can have some challenges emerge later on. You want to get this all the way out to the edge of the property line. You know, this plan is a working document. It's not one that's done and sits on a shelf. It's designed to be updated on a very regular basis, especially how fast we're growing, so that as there are new collector streets that are identified by staff from all the jurisdictions, they bring that back to RFATS and we go ahead and amend it and update it and make sure that's reflected. Okay, and that brings us to the end of the formal presentation. So if there's any additional questions, I'll do my best to try to answer them.
Any other questions? Yes, sir, Mr. Roddy.
Just thinking on a right now, everyday travel basis, while you were going through your presentation, I thought about the Dave Lyles, the Cherry Road, the Selden East, the 901 Heckle. How often do we go out and study traffic signal synchronization? You know, because I think that contributes to some of the traffic issues that we do have. When you make it through this light, you get to the next one, you have to stop. Make two lights, you have to stop. So, you know, and I'm thinking with a reasonable speed traveling, you should be able to make quite a few lights before having to stop at every single light on Cherry Road, every single light on Dave Lyles, because if we can get those, I mean, that's something that we can at least be looking at to keep traffic flowing. Yes, once it stops, it bottlenecks backs up.
You are making an excellent point. This is something we've talked about a great deal at RFATS. And we go out about every 3 to 5 years and look at looking at the signalization again and seeing whether it needs to be retimed. One of the things we're also looking at right now is adaptive traffic control signals, putting in software that can literally change in real time as conditions change throughout the day. You know, this type of work is going to take on much more importance in the years ahead, because if we think back to a lot of what's been done over the last 2 decades with road widenings, we can't widen every road out from 5 to 7 and so on and so on. At some point, you have to stop, and we're going to have to shift to some of these other tools like collector streets, like traffic signal synchronization, to make sure we're getting as much efficiency out of what we do have going forward.
I mean, like you mentioned, if we're able to do this or nail this down to certain points of the day, because you're thinking between 6 and 8 a.m., people traveling this particular road, we know traffic's headed this way. Lights need to be, so this traffic can continue. Then maybe on another street somewhere else, another road, traffic's going that way. It needs to allow traffic to, it's much continuation of traffic flow. I think that'll really get that frustration out of the drive or the commute when people are traveling to and from work, especially mornings and evenings. But right now we do have some areas, I don't care how much synchronization we have, it's just gonna be traffic. You're gonna hit it, so. But good to know that that's being looked at with the red lights.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Anybody else? Thanks, David.
Thank you, sir.
Shows that with this explosive growth we have, you're a very important man for our future.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Next person is Huntington Subdivision Board member to discuss the proposed cell tower.
They withdrew.
Oh, they're not coming? Okay. Next is public forum. Nobody signed up for that. Do we have a motion on consent agenda?
Move to approve.
Second.
Discussion. Question on the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Next item, public hearings. Council to hold a public hearing and consider third reading of an ordinance authorizing an amendment to the agreement for development of joint county industrial and business park, York and Chester counties, to enlarge the boundaries of the joint county industrial park to include certain real property located in York County and other matters related thereto. Anybody here want to speak against? Anybody want to speak in favor?
Move to close.
Second.
Discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
Move to approve.
Second.
Discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Next item, council to hold a public hearing and consider the third reading of an ordinance authorizing the termination of the existing multi-county park agreement by and between Cherokee County, South Carolina, and York County, South Carolina, and other matters related thereto. Anybody here want to speak against? Anybody want to speak in favor?
Move to close.
Second.
Discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
Move to approve.
Second.
Discussion? Question on the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Next item, old business, coming to prevent a quarterly report to council regarding the construction projects. Yes, sir.
Good evening.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm pleased to present the quarterly building program update.
Name and address.
If you would, please refer to.
Sorry, I forgot that.
But if you would, please refer to tab section.
Thank you, Mr. Williams.
Tab section 1, and we'll start with Moss Justice Center. Current work includes structural erection. We have 2 specific buildings, separate buildings going up. One is basically erected, the other we're coming out of the ground. Slab on grade of the first floor and second floor to the judicial side has been placed. We'll be placing the third floor in short term. Inside that building 1, I'll show you a photo. We are currently doing rough ends of mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, as well as the metal stud framing. Visually, this is the front entrance. This is an aerial photograph as of the end of last month. This is building 1. This is the judicial expansion. If you'll recall, this is the parking deck that has been completed already, and then this is the sheriff's expansion.
When do you anticipate the frontal elevation to kind of show itself?
Excuse me?
When do you expect the frontal elevation, like the picture before this, will start showing itself?
So all this canopy here, we'll have to demo. We've got to open this first, and then as part of the renovations of these 2 portions, we'll be demolishing these and then basically giving it the facelift. So again, this is like most of the projects, multiple phases, fairly complex. But once these are complete, well, this one we'll be able to start renovating here. This complete, we'll start building renovating there. So it's kind of a very linear A before B before C.
In other words, it'll be a while.
Well, overall, we are, this will be our last project that we'll wrap up, and overall, we're about September 2019 before this project is complete. So we're into it for quite a bit of time already, but we've got a good bit of work to go still. This is erection on building 2. This is a sheriff's expansion. This is a slab pour on the lower level. This is some masonry walls inside the tunnel. If you recall, we had to build a tunnel and expand that tunnel to get transportation from the prisoners into the new court expansion. And this is building 1 elevated to the second slab, and like I said earlier, we've got one more slab. Second project is the new family court. Work concentration involves the concentrate on the retaining walls, backfill of those retaining walls, and then subgrade masonry. We are kind of still at the ground level. We'll start doing the it's multiple phases or terraced, and then we'll start some underground rough-in, and just as some underground rough-in, and then we will be able to start kind of going vertical. These are where the big retaining walls are. There's a sally port here. There's a fairly large retaining wall holding up the building on the back side. And we're building it from this way forward. So, new parking lot. The access drive has been completed. We're not really opening it. We want to limit the traffic on that until we're finished the project.
So the timing's still on schedule?
Yes. We've had some bad weather. All the projects have been adjusted for some weather, things like that. But we are about 11 months away from completing this project. This is the retaining walls I was talking about. This is the top of the retaining wall. Our next project is the government center. Majority of the structural steel has been completed. We had a topping out event a while back, although we still have some structural steel that we are erecting, specifically in the council wing. That's not that area. Slab on deck for the main buildings has been placed, and the roof structure has been, the mansard roof structure has been roughed in, framework. Substantial completion will take place, we're shooting for December, so end of this year we'll be able to move into that facility. Then we'll start the work on the rest of the campus. It's an aerial of the, as of the end of the month, last month. The interior wall, the exterior, the metal stud framing, sheeting, and we'll start installing filling up the fenestration, filling up the with windows and doors in short term. Then we'll start with the exterior veneer, the mansard roof structure. And this is some additional structure. This is your parking lot. We've had to expand into it. We've generally speaking, we've got most of the unsuitable soils addressed, but one area that we could possibly run into some is in this area. Interior wall framing, and we've got some MEP rough-ins going on as well. Next project is our Public Works Supports Facility. We're coming to the conclusion of the first phase here. Building maintenance, which is what we're calling Building A, right here. That's the expanding of the existing admin building. We're just about complete. We're shooting for a final inspection early May. Equipment building, equipment maintenance. This is really the largest portion of this project that is currently going on in this area. Once this is complete, we're shooting for next week to, I believe it's next week to do our final inspection. We'll be able to move that operation in here, then we'll be able to go in and demolish this and build a new equipment storage area. So again, multiple phases. You got A before B. All work should be complete in September on this campus.
Could I ask a question on that, and David might be one to answer it more, but hate to keep harping on the same thing, but are we still looking at the fueling situation on that?
Yes. And I think you want to address it? I think we've got a plan in place to get it addressed. I'll be more than happy to forward that information to you, the specifics of it. I'll forward it to administration to send to everyone.
As though the current way while we're working through it is very dangerous for some of our trucks backing in and out.
Understand. Photograph paving, this is again, the new equipment maintenance. This is the interior of the new equipment maintenance. This is an additional parking area of the building maintenance. And then this is the interior corridor of the the building maintenance to the front. Our final project is the recycling building. Again, this one, very similar, is coming to a conclusion. We're anticipating final inspection into this month. Then we'll have to finalize commissioning of the equipment. The building will not work without the fairly technical equipment. We bid that as a separate package. And we will be doing that, and it should run through probably the end of the month. We're shooting for a main occupancy in end of April, beginning of May. This is interior finish, durable surfaces, concrete apron, and then
What a contrast from the present one.
and then we have our management schedule. The red line represents today's date. It's been updated and accurate. If there are any questions, I'll be more than happy to try to answer them at this time.
Questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Next item is our growth management coordinator to provide a monthly update.
Good
Yes, ma'am.
evening. For the record, Audra Miller, Growth Management Coordinator. This is my monthly update. This is a slide you've seen before. These are the projects that I am working on. So the first one I want to talk about is the impact fees for Fort Mill School District. We had our impact fees 101 on March 29th. The consultant for Tischler Bice came in. We do have an audio available if anybody wants to listen to it. It was a very good presentation giving a general overview of how impact fees work. The final report was issued and presented to the Planning Commission at their April meeting. That is posted on the Planning and Development webpage, and it can be accessed by the general public. At that meeting, it was solely a presentation to the Planning Commission. No decision or recommendation has been made. It is scheduled to go to the Planning Commission for a vote on May 14th. At that point, it will go to council for first reading on May 21st. Second reading and public hearing is scheduled for June 18th. I want to stop here for a second because the press will listen to this presentation, the general public listens to this presentation, and there has been some discussion behind the scenes about the size of this room and the number of people that may be attending that public hearing. I would encourage everyone to keep checking the county's webpage, specifically the county council calendar, for any changes to that date and location. There has been discussion about maybe going to a larger room, and I don't know if a final decision has been made. Okay. So,
Mr. Kendry, have you checked that's
No, sir, I'll get right on that.
and I only point that out, I don't want to confuse people, but everybody takes this presentation as gospel, and then they get upset if I have to change something or provide an update, and the best way I can provide an update is the county council calendar. And then third reading will be July 16th, and at that time, you will also have the intergovernmental agreements that go along with the ordinances. And I do want to spend a minute explaining what the process is and what you're going to be looking at and what the Planning Commission will be looking at. The Planning Commission is not adopting the report. The report is a necessary element of adopting an ordinance. The county already has two ordinances in effect, 7196 and 7396. They were passed in 1996. 7196 is basically, I'm going to call it the enabling ordinance for the county. It lays out the general impact fee structure. If the county's going to pass an impact fee, this is how you do it. This is what's required. These are the reports that are required. This is the baseline study. 7396 was the actual school impact fee ordinance. I wanted to highlight these two because what is probably going to happen the minute the ordinances as revised get posted, everyone's going to think the county is passing a general impact fee ordinance. And that's not what's happening. All we are doing is revising an existing ordinance to update the process and procedures for impact fees. And normally, we give those to the Planning Commission and the County Council in red line, and that would be the tip-off that it's an existing ordinance. The problem is that in 22 years, so much has happened and state law has changed. If I gave you a red line version, all you would see is red. So there's not going to be any red line because it's a pretty substantive and substantial change. So I just wanted to highlight that point for you. So when your constituency calls you and says, I see this ordinance 7196, is the county now implementing impact fees right now, and what's the amount? No, it's just the process. Those ordinances, I'm still working with the consultant's attorney and with the county attorney on that. So they will be included in the Planning Commission packets, and we normally post those the Wednesday before the meeting. So that's for people, if people are asking to look at them, that's what I would direct them to. So that is what the Planning Commission will be looking at and providing a recommendation on May 14th. It's not the report, but the actual ordinances. So any questions on that? The intergovernmental agreements, there's actually 3 existing intergovernmental agreements. There's one with Fort Mill School District, one with Fort Mill, and one with TEK. Those also have to be updated. The Planning Commission does not have jurisdiction over the intergovernmental agreements. Those are solely with the County Council. So Planning Commission will not look at those. They'll come directly to Council, and that's why I'm tentatively saying they'll come at 3rd reading. The county impact fees study, that is well underway. Again, the impact fees 101 that addressed the general impact fees generally, so it applied to county impact fee. As I said before, the consultant has requested data. We're in the process of giving him all the data. I did ask him what did he think the milestones for the April-May time period would be. As part of any impact fee study, there's certain things you have to do. One of them is a land use assumption, so he will provide that to staff to review and sign off on. As I said in my last presentation, they need to give us an opinion on whether or not you can use impact fees for roads that are owned by the state. They said they should have that to me during this time period. And then because Moss Justice and the Family Court is going to have excess capacity, they're going to provide an opinion on how much of that new construction can be reimbursed through the impact fee process. Stormwater Utility District, we met with Rock Hill, Lancaster, and had a very good telephone conference with Horry County to talk about their districts, so we kind of had some ideas of where we were going. We met with the consultant April 10th to discuss the draft ordinances. The goal is to have the draft ordinance to the council on June 18th for first reading, July 16th for second reading and public hearing, and August 20th for 3rd reading. These dates are very important, and I have no give in this schedule because if we're going to start billing for this upcoming fiscal year, I have to be done by August 20th. Also, I wanted to point out to you, I am watching the public hearings and what you are going to be having a public hearing on. So if you notice or remember, your school district impact fee and this one are on separate council meetings, and that's intentional on my part to keep those kind of separate. Stormwater ordinance revisions, not too much to report on this, but just wanted to let you know, we did have our kickoff meeting with the consultant. They're starting to draft the ordinances. They feel like 9 months is realistic, but they will try to shorten that and bring it to you sooner. Ordinance revisions, Phase 1, your first reading is scheduled for tonight. We brought forward the ones we have talked about. Again, temporary uses, landfills, and public service uses are put on hold. We are saying that second reading and public hearing is May 7th, and third reading and adoption is May 21st. I put tentative on that because it depends on what happens tonight. If there are substantial revisions that council asks for, I can guarantee you that I cannot turn those around with the consultant in 12 hours because of agenda deadlines. Also, if they are substantive enough, I need to consult with the county attorney on whether they would have to go back to the planning commission for an updated recommendation. So after y'all vote on those ordinances, I will know if we're going to public hearing on the 7th. Phase 2, I wanted to provide an update on this. First of all, I'm supposed to provide a reminder that the consultant was only tasked with 155, which is the zoning ordinance. Chapter 154 is the preliminary plat, subdivision process, and general standards. So that is what Mr. Merriman referred to about in your upcoming budget that you're looking at, having the consultant tackle 154 as well after 155. April 23rd and 24th are the stakeholders meetings. That was done at the request of the consultant. The point of those meetings are just to get some general feedback from various interest groups on things that they would like to see changed in the code. The culmination of that is a Planning Commission special called meeting on the 24th at 6, where the Planning Commission will get a chance to weigh in. One of the stakeholder groups is the general public. We intentionally kept that smaller so it was more functional and practical, just to get general input. The consultant, however, did have me ask the Planning Commission whether or not they would allow members of the public who show up to the workshop, or I shouldn't say workshop, to a special called meeting to give input, and the Planning Commission said yes. So any member that shows up on April 24th at 6, any member of the public that comes to that meeting is more than welcome to provide input and their requests for changes to the zoning code. The council workshop is scheduled for May 8th in the large conference room at Heckle. And I do have to, at this time, give a thank you to Councilman Roddy. When we sent out the proposed dates, the consultant basically messed up his schedule, and he gave us a date that he wasn't available. And as luck would have it, that was the date the entire council was available. We then went back and asked y'all again, and Councilman Roddy was very generous to say, go ahead and schedule it on the date that I'm not available, and we'll meet one-on-one. So I wanted to thank him for doing that. To get you thinking about this discussion in this workshop, this is all rhetorical. This is just to get you in the mindset of Phase 2 ordinance revisions. The topics can be broad, like are there any particular land uses you're concerned about? Are you concerned about the quality and or cost of development? Too many, too few matters coming to council? Are any of the parts of the code confusing? Are there any comprehensive plan goals and objectives not fulfilled? Are there common complaints from your constituents that you would like addressed? And then on specific, what I put up here are some of the ones that I've heard from council members in no particular order. On-street parking, that's been an issue. Driveway length, signs. We have 2 different sign codes, one for the general county and one in Lake Wiley. So is it too restrictive, too lenient? Scenic overlay, whether you want to expand or contract that. Right now, it only precludes single-wide mobile homes. Uses not addressed, small cell towers, solar farms, food trucks, agritourism, Airbnb. Buffers always come up. Should they be undisturbed, disturbed for utilities, disturbed if bare? Where do we allow things like horses and chickens? Is there minimum lot size for horses? How do we address the farm-to-table movement? One of the other ones that came up, or that I thought of last week, was also the commercial districts. One of the things that I have seen council struggle with in the 3 years that I've been here is a use isn't allowed in BD1, but it's allowed in BD3. But boy, you really don't want that BD3 to be a blanket approval, and you start chipping away at things you don't want. So maybe this is the time to add another commercial district or switch some uses around. After the consultant meets with council, he will issue a report. I'm going to bring the report back to council. I anticipate doing that at your June 4th meeting. At that point, I'll be asking you, is this a good scope? And do you want the consultant to go forward with preparing the actual ordinance revisions? You will have to approve an amendment to the contract because the contract does not have an approved task for the actual revisions and the amount that the consultant presents. And then lastly, I wanted to bring this to your attention. Council asked that this be done as quickly as possible. When Mr. Kendry presented the consultant's general scope of work, the consultant had said, no problem, we can have this done by November. I think that's true if the consultant got to sit in a room and just draft with no input from anybody. That's a totally unrealistic time frame. There's no way. I need to schedule public meetings, workshops with council and planning commission. There's staffing needs that'll have to be addressed, review times, not only for staff, but for the county attorney. So I'm saying the more realistic time frame is late spring, early summer 2019. And it really is contingent upon how many public meetings do you expect us to have, and how many workshops am I going to need with council and planning commission. And I just want to highlight, we did started with 3 topics that were supposed to be pretty simple, morphed into 7 ordinance revisions, actually 10 was 7, and planning commission took 4.5 hours on just that. So this is a big task that you all have asked and that you're going to be taking on. So that was it on phase 2. Is there any questions or things you'd like me to know? Are you okay with the time frame being expanded?
I'd rather be done correctly. It takes a little longer.
Okay. So, and then lastly, growth management. That was one of my tasks for definition, and I got response from council. I also got Mr. Shanahan's definition, and I wanted to accentuate, or not accentuate, I wanted to highlight the positive on this issue. You did have areas of consensus. I'm not saying every single member agreed, but there was consensus. One was it was not defined as zero growth or to artificially limit. Infrastructure was the key element. You did all pretty much agree that there needed to be a mix of housing type, and you understood that it was a multifaceted issue involving transportation, utilities, economic development, to name 3. The challenge is going to be defining the areas moving through. What is the mix of housing? Is the infrastructure concurrent, before, after? And what's the acceptable level of service? So this is my attempt at giving you a definition of growth management. And it is to identify and implement policies and regulations that allow York County to expand housing and economic development opportunities in a manner that balances the rate of growth with the needed infrastructure improvements to serve new and existing development at an acceptable level of service. So I'm going to leave that with y'all. And I think Andy and I talked about it. The next step is to come back with a resolution to adopt that. Is that correct? The next thing after that is, I would say, to establish goals and objectives to achieve that and set reasonable timeframes. But one of the things I want to highlight is all the tasks that you have, not only me working on, but other departments. And this is not an exhaustive list. This is just the ones I could do off the top of my head very quickly. Working on a thoroughfare plan, impact fee study, stormwater utility district, stormwater ordinances. You have pennies. You're going to rewrite, update Chapter 155 and possibly 154. We're working on water and sewer details. They have water and sewer projects that they're doing. We're doing new aerial imagery. You want them to finalize a solid waste management plan. We're working on new facilities, moving offices, and the implementation of the fire study. I think you have a full plate for the remainder, for the fiscal year 18-19. So I can come up with an action plan, but I want to encourage, suggest, tell you that that action plan will pick up in 2019, 2020. I know that I cannot add another project on my plate for the next 6 months. And that doesn't mean I'm not taking the growth management seriously. All of these are part of growth management, and we're working on them. And so that is the end of my update, if you have any questions.
Questions for Audra?
One of the things listed in the agenda was Cato Southbridge. I'm just curious where we are on that development.
We are still working with the consultant, but one of the things that has happened is Ms. Dodson is leaving Lincoln Harris, so we have to find a new contact. She is going to work for the public sector in Charlotte.
All righty then.
But the Project Leah is moving forward on that one.
And Project Leah can move forward without
Yeah,
a development plan.
yeah,
All right.
yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate it. Oh,
The name you asked me about, I have a,
Oh, thank you.
yeah, I wrote it on the back. I thought about it when I saw you, just when I come in.
okay, next item, rezoning action. Consider third reading case number 1731 to resume to rezone from RD2 to RUD at Heckle Boulevard in the Rock Hill community.
This is when we're deferring to the second meeting in May, which would be May 21st.
Move to defer to May 21st.
Second.
Discussion. Question on the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Next item. Council to approve a financial participation supplemental agreement with the South Carolina Department of Transportation for improvements to the United States 21 Anderson Cowan Farm Road intersection project.
Move to approve.
Second.
Discussion. Question on the motions. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Next item, council to consider adopting a resolution consenting to and approving the assignment and assumption of FELO agreement between Crescent Lakemont East LLC and Spring Hill Farms Road LLC of the FELO agreement dated September 19th, 2016.
Move to approve. Second.
Discussion.
I just have one
Yes.
question. This is not a
Ms. Cox.
commentary on this particular one, but when we do these assignments, I assume that we are doing the due diligence to make sure the assignee has the requisite ability to follow through with the requirements. And I just want to make sure that that's the case before I.
Yes, ma'am, if you look at the paragraph, the company reported, excuse me, the company reported 9,893,764 in real property on April 10th, so it met the obligations.
Question on the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Next item, council to consider approving the FELO agreement estoppel certificate as to the Crescent Lakemont East LLC agreement dated September 19th, 2016.
Move to approve.
Second.
Discussion.
Yeah, this is,
Yes.
I think Ms. Cox's point is a good one. In fact, so did Crescent. They wanted to make it so much that that's what this is, proving that when they were the part of that they met it. Not every company does that, so
Yes, sir.
but in this particular case, they did.
Next item, council to consider first,
Vote on it.
oh, I'm sorry. You threw me off once again, Mr. Lewis. Question on the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Next item, council to consider first reading of an ordinance to amend the York County Code of Ordinances, Chapter 155 zoning code, so as to provide for micro winery, winery with agritourism, to provide for regulatory provisions related thereto, to amend the definition and use table in order to establish the uses and provide the districts in which they are allowed, to establish micro winery as a special exception accessory use in RUD and RUD1, to establish winery as a permitted use in AGC, AGC1, BD3, and ID, to establish winery with agritourism as a permitted use in BD3 and ID, and a special exception use in AGC and AGC1 to provide supplemental regulations for wineries with agritourism AGC, AGC1, and accessory micro wineries and RUD and RUD1 in order to address items such as minimum lot size, on-site activities, hours of operation, parking, signage, and proof of other related permits, and to provide for other matters related thereto.
Move
to approve.
with the following revisions. Replace the term residential structure with dwelling unit for measuring minimum separation requirements between certain wineries and off-site residences. 2, increase the minimum separation requirements for outdoor gathering areas associated with wineries with agritourism and off-site dwelling units from 150 feet to 200 feet. I would also like to revise the hours of operation to extend the closing time Thursday through Saturday to midnight.
Second.
Okay. Discussion.
Another,
Yep.
Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna summarize. In other words, that's the planning commission recommendations and an additional council recommendation to extend the
That is
hours
correct.
just from Thursday to Saturday.
And I just have a question on, not the ending times this time, since we discussed that so much at the workshop, but beginning times on some of these outdoor agritourism type things. Are we limiting, and this may be something for Audra, I don't know, or maybe y'all can help me with it, with a 10 o'clock start time on some of these things, are we limiting when people can come and start picking their peaches and tomatoes if they want to get out at 9 in the morning and start that before the heat gets so bad for public pickings, if we say you can't start it till 10 o'clock in the morning?
Only if they're planting at a winery.
Well,
If
you've
they're
got,
grapes, yeah, it could be.
you've got
could be
like,
picking, yeah.
you know, Windy Hill, which is a winery, and they have apple pickings and all as well. You know, are you, that's my question with that. I'm just wondering
With the
if,
apple
I'm
picking?
hoping we start having more of these types of events, and so I'm just wondering if we're limiting that by saying we got 10 o'clock hours.
What time do they currently have? What time, if I wanted to go pick apples, what time could I start doing it? I have no idea. I'm not being.
I don't know, and I don't know,
Does the special exception designation not give flexibility to do that based upon the surrounding uses? Is that not the reason why we kind of incorporated the special exception requirement?
In answer to both questions, one, it is true, this is only for wineries. We don't really have agritourism for anything else. So we can address the global issue of agritourism through the when we do 155. In answer to Councilwoman Cox's question, since it is specific in the ordinance as part of the special exception, yes, the ZBA can't just ignore the requirement. The person would have to ask for a variance from the time, but it is a possibility.
So that they can address that at the special exception?
They
phase
could,
to make
through the-
sure it fits the surrounding uses.
Yes.
I have a,
So why would we not just set a time? I mean, if somebody can go out and start bulldozing on a developer's property at 7 o'clock in the morning, why can somebody not go out and pick apples at 7 o'clock in the morning? Why would we not set a time at,
I think the concern was, and you have to remember with agritourism, one of the things that the consultant heard from staff was it wasn't just picking apples, it was people coming to the site with their vehicles, the noise that could possibly be generated to the surrounding neighbors and all of that. And so they thought 10 a.m. was a reasonable start time. But of course, it's up to council if you feel that is too restrictive and you want to change that to 8 a.m. or 7 a.m., that's obviously council's prerogative.
7 a.m. is great till 2 tour buses unload 80 people each.
Well, that's the same thing with
Your house.
12 o'clock closing time. That's why, if it can be addressed as a special exception, I don't know why we don't address both ends of the special exception.
the
The
opening.
closing time and the.
Exactly. I mean, somebody out in the middle of nowhere is not, nobody's gonna care. I think we
That
gotta
was
give
one thing I
flexibility.
remember from the workshop, is 8 o'clock is generally the closing time in most communities throughout the state.
That was this big surprise to the planning
Right.
commission as we all sat there and Googled wineries that a lot of them did close at 5 p.m. or 8 p.m. We didn't really find any in a true agricultural setting that stayed open much later than 8 p.m.
Yeah, if we could address that time, if they can do that through the special exception, I don't see a problem doing either one and leaving, going with what's written.
Since we're just discussing wineries and we're talking about a midnight closing time, thinking about Cat's Paw, like right now existing, would they now be allowed to stay open till midnight? Or would they have to go back and apply for a midnight?
They were precluded from having outdoor activities, and remember, these closing times are the outdoor activities that are ending. Yeah, they'd have to go back to the ZBA and ask that that condition be removed and agree to stay under these conditions.
Any other questions?
I guess if, say, an outdoor winery wanted to build an indoor tasting structure or whatever, then the time on that pretty much goes away because it's an indoor thing.
Right.
Any other questions? I just need to know, are they open tonight?
The Cat's Paw?
No. Never mind, just another little thought. Question on the motion, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Just curious, how did the shift happen in the agenda? Things were way out of change from what we were presented Wednesday. Things are in different orders. If you don't have a quick answer, you can tell me later. I just never saw that happen before, so I was just curious.
Is the next one event venues?
I think, yeah, on the.
Yeah, I can
present
tell you
one.
why it changed, because that's the order, it's just, it reflects the order in which the recommendations are summarized by the consultant. So we don't have to jump up and down on that page,
Oh, okay, well, whatever.
I guess.
Well, you can let me have a better answer later, Bill. Council to consider first reading of an ordinance to amend the York County Code of Ordinances, Chapter 155 zoning code, so as to provide for event venue and event venue large capacity, to provide for regulatory provisions related thereto, to amend the definition and use table in order to establish the uses and provide for the districts in which they are allowed, to establish event venue and large capacity venues as special exceptions in AGC 1, RUD, RUD 1, to add event venues as permitted use in large capacity event venues as a special exception in BD 3, to amend individual use regulations in BD 3 and add supplemental regulations in AGC, AGC 1, RUD, RUD 1, and BD 3 in order to address items such as on-site managers, operational plans with associated restrictions, separation requirements from residences, lot size, on-site activities, hours of operation, and parking, to amend and conform the off-street parking requirements table and to provide for other matters related thereto.
Move to approve.
Hello?
I wasn't gonna put any revisions.
Need a, you're not
They
putting,
can change them as we go, that's what.
okay, so you're not putting any revisions in the motion?
Now, we can discuss it. I guess the one that it would probably be consistent with the other one is to keep for purposes of measuring separation distance, change residential structure to dwelling unit, which is one of the plan of the recommendations from the planning commission.
Okay, so we're in discussion, so.
And then, all right, I'll withdraw my motion and make another one.
Okay,
All right, I move to approve with the following conditions. For purposes of measuring separation distance, change residential structure to dwelling units. Increase the minimum separation for outdoor uses to dwelling units from 150 to 200 feet. Decrease the minimum lot size for event venues from 10 acres to 5 acres in AGC, AGC 1, RUD, and RUD 2. That is RUD 1. Yeah, I don't know where 2 came from. That is basically the first, third, and fourth planning commission recommendations.
okay. What, so for, I think in agenda meeting, we had a little talk about BD 3. Oh, I'm sorry.
Agenda meeting, and nobody was making a motion.
Did we have a, did we have a second? Okay, now we got a second. So my question is, Andy, did Was there not some discussion at the agenda meeting, whether it's through Michael or me or somebody, about adjusting the hours of operation to go to midnight for BD3? Am I dreaming, or was that part of the discussion?
Well, I don't think I'm in your dreams. I would say that I don't recall a specific BD3
So
recommendation.
your answer
for
is
a-
no to that question?
Yeah.
You don't have you don't have to
I would not have a problem adding that as a
embellish, just
condition.
yes or no.
No,
I
sir.
would, yeah, I would not have a problem adding a condition in BD3 that it's just hours
my
of 12
favorite
PM,
Just
12
on-
AM,
Just on Friday and Saturday nights?
just on just in BD3, anytime.
Okay.
Because that's how it works now, BD3.
So does the
You got
person
those
that gave
hours,
the
man?
second agree to that?
I do.
Okay, discussion, further discussion.
My understanding is that we are doing this because currently there is no ability to have an event. And that, as I understand it, that we abandoned the permit requirements, and we're not talking about that, and that's done, right?
That's the temporary uses, correct, yeah, this is permanent event being used.
This is
right.
permanent.
Correct.
This is just allows a use that we don't currently have the ability to do. My understanding, though, is that with the special exceptions, am I right that the more flexibility we put in the ordinance, the more flexibility that it gives to, I mean, what's appropriate in Michael Johnson's district is not the same as what's in mine or Robert's. So what we've crafted is a way for us to address that and give the flexibility to do it in a way that meets the needs of the community in that area. Is that right? Is that a yes? I want to make sure that that's what I'm voting
That was
for.
my understanding also.
I believe that's what the BD3, though, expanding it and giving greater hours during BD3 kind of takes that into account, where you're gonna have more, that is by definition a much more up-level commercial use already. So if you take that and you compare it to RUD, RUD1, or even an AGC, AGC1, well, that's gonna be vast quantities of land, and say you're in Robert's districts. So you're giving greater flexibility where it's needed, and trying to keep a check on it where you may not want something just to randomly pop up in a field somewhere.
The only concern I have about this is that, for instance, the development in Britt's district, where we approved the car lot, the car mechanic, that's BD3.
Yep.
And we're basically making blanket decisions instead of giving that to the planning commission for them to operate at a period of time that may not be appropriate for that particular area. And I think it makes sense if all of our land use designations make sense, but sometimes they don't.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and that's why it's very important for that, but when you make something BD3, that it's appropriate 360 days a year, which I think that's an exception that's definitely different from every other BD3 area in the county, but that's
Wasn't
good.
that limited though solely to the use of as a car lot?
Yeah.
And it was BD3, but
That
then
was
we
business.
took away literally everything that could happen on that piece of property, except it can be
But
a
it's
car
not.
repair lot.
It's not deed restricted, so it's BD3. I mean, that's its zoning. We
Yeah.
can say that it has conditions, but the reality is that, I don't know that that's the only one. There was one in my district that was incorrectly done BD3 that we had to change. I just don't understand why we just don't give the flexibility to do that. If they're all required to have special exceptions, why are we mandating hours and just let them handle it?
I don't know that they're all required to have special exceptions. Right.
I thought that's what we did. We allowed it as a special exception.
No, that was concrete plants, but not all 7 ordinances require special exceptions.
Well, in this ordinance, it says special exceptions in BD3, and
And large capacity venues are special exceptions in AGC, AGC1, RUD, RUD1. It's in the ordinance that says there are special exceptions
Right.
for those.
so I guess my question is, if we mandate the hours of operation in the ordinance, then those folks don't have the flexibility at this, I mean, you gotta get a special exception regardless. How do we make sure that they've got the flexibility to do what they need to do to address the differences in our districts?
Okay, flexibility is a difficult word for me because of how the special exception works. And when you put in a specific time, the specific time, you then have to ask for a variance to change it. And there are different standards for a variance. You actually have to prove a hardship. So to me, when you put specific time limits on it, you're going to actually have less flexibility because the ZBA can't ignore the law and say, well, I can't find a hardship, but I'm going to grant it to you anyway because I like you or I like your business. If you don't put any times in, though, you are actually giving 100% flexibility to the ZBA, and it has the potential of becoming very arbitrary because then you're asking them to restrict on a case-by-case basis.
That's the whole purpose of a special exception, isn't it? I mean,
That's a decision council makes. What happens is, if there's no times associated with it, then these outdoor uses associated with event center can occur 24/7. I don't have any authority, planning department, code enforcement has no authority to stop it. So if the ZBA says that's great, that's what'll happen. It becomes incumbent upon the ZBA to then establish the times, and it's done on a case-by-case basis.
So the large capacity venues, that, I didn't realize that was special exception. So
For BD3, yeah.
is it only for BD3?
BD3 is the only one that allows the regular event venues that's less than 100 to be done as a permitted use. Everything else is by special exception.
I'm confused. So are these the businesses that already exist, or no?
Well, they technically don't exist because it was never identified as a use.
So okay, we'll use Cherokee Farms as an example.
Okay.
So did they have to come and get a special exception to hold weddings at Cherokee Farms?
They would, if memory serves, I am going off memory, they may have to rezone and then get a special exception, yes.
But just once, not every time. See,
Right, just once.
That's what I think, just make sure you don't understand it.
Yeah, and again, when we're talk about hours of operation, I just want to keep reiterating, it's for the outdoor portion of it.
Yeah, I don't want to get lost in this fog, though. I mean, this started with just talking about events, venues, and I'm kind of hearing a little bit of a business kind of merged into this or whatever, and I might be slow tonight or whatever, but here again, the heart of this is just people having like a wedding or some kind of special event like that, correct?
It was to cover two different business models. One was in the rural areas, and it was agricultural and rural districts that were having these events, and they could be indoor or outdoor, and then they're also to address a true commercial operation where you're doing a standalone event center. And what became challenging is everybody's on board with letting people do whatever they want with their property until it's next to them, and you have music going until midnight, or you have all the traffic associated with it and the lights and things like that.
So let me ask this another way. Per staff, since we're certainly not paid to do this and we're not educated in this, as obviously sometimes our comments show that, what exactly are you recommending based on all the feedback from council is the best avenue to go with?
My recommendation is, I believe the Planning Commission's recommendations, except for the BD3, I thought those were very reasonable. They brought up, especially the rural areas, brought up some very good points of things that the consultant and I wouldn't have known about, things that are going on out in the country and the hours of operations that they're currently doing. So I think they're very reasonable, but with the BD3, I don't disagree with Councilman Johnson that I think 8 p.m. is a little early during the week. I would leave it at 10 p.m. and then midnight on the weekends.
I guess in the motion I made included all the planning commission's recommendations except for the one that identifies a tent as an indoor structure. Do you think that that's reasonable? That's the one that I think is, the tent is
I think that's pushing
outdoor.
it.
Yeah.
I think.
Basically, if all it's got to do is have drops, it doesn't even say they have to be down.
Yeah,
And so that, I'm a little, because, I mean, I don't, if it changes through the public, I mean, we got 3 readings. If it becomes apparent that it wants to change through the process, I'm not open, but to start with it, I just want to make sure that,
Yeah, I thought the tents was pushing the idea of indoor structure, because I don't think they're gonna muffle sound and light too much, so.
Any other questions? You know, per Mr. Williams' comment being first reading, I mean, I'm okay with that, but maybe we need some more succinct, to the point, short Cliff Note versions of exactly what we're gonna do, because my big fear with all this being hit to the citizens is government overreach, and we're about to, in my mind, create a monster, but I'm trying to keep an open mind. Question?
and again, it's not, that wasn't intent, because there's no way for them to do it right now. We're trying to get law-abiding citizens a law to abide, and that is.
I get it, I get it.
Didn't mean to extend extension, but that's.
Question on the motion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Next item, council to consider first reading of an ordinance to amend the York County Code of Ordinances, Chapter 155 zoning code, so as to provide for non-metallic mineral product manufacturing, to provide for regulatory provisions related thereto, to amend the definition and use table in order to establish the uses and provide for the districts in which they are allowed or removed, to establish non-metallic mineral product manufacturing as a special exception in use in AGC, to change from a permitted use to a special exception use in industrial develop, ID, and to remove its permitted use in UD, to amend individual district use regulations in AGC and ID by adding supplemental regulations in order to address items such as minimum lot size, access and routing plans, separation, screening, dust regulation, hours of operation, performance standards agreements, and proof of other governmental regulatory compliance requirements, permits, to remove non-metallic mineral product manufacturing as an allowable use in UD, to invoke the pending ordinance doctrine, and to provide for other matters related thereto.
Motion to approve with the following revision: remove AGC as a permitted district for non-metallic mineral product manufacturing.
Second.
Discussion.
But,
Yes, sir.
yeah, my only, I meant to ask staff this question because I anticipated this would come up. And we got 3 readings. I'll support it now, but mine, the workshop sounded like the staff's recommendation was with that addition that we leave it, that we're better off leaving it like it is. I guess, one other thing that I talked about, if we've got to have them somewhere, or they're all coming from out of counties, which that means they're taxing our roads all over the county instead. So that's just something I want to think about. Something that didn't come up at the workshop, that because that's one thing we're concerned about is what they're doing to our roads. Well, if we can't have them somewhere, and then they have to come, everything's coming from Gastonia or Lancaster or Chester, that taxes the road further. But I don't want to put staff on the spot here, but that's a question I intend to ask between now and second read.
Any other questions? I'm gonna put them on the spot. So per my understanding of this ordinance, it removes AGC. So does that not eliminate pretty much all options concrete facilities have pretty much in the county?
For all intents and purposes, yes, sir, it does.
Plus, this is a pending ordinance doctrine, which means, boom, once notice is given of the public hearing, it's in effect.
Well, only if we
Is that
pass
Only
the
what you
third.
decide to do.
Is that true?
So, but Andy.
Yes, it is.
It is, they're allowed in industrial, light industrial. So they're not, I mean, currently,
As a special
as a
exception.
special exception.
That's
So that
right.
doesn't mean that there won't be any concrete plants if they are looking to go into where we've allocated for them to begin with.
Sure. But, I mean, the fact that we're making them a special exception means heightened scrutiny is gonna be put on any project that comes in. And, so I mean, it effectively, while there may be allowable in light industrial, it in effect severely limits their ability to do business in this county. And I think that's where our recommendation's coming from.
Can we between, to Councilman Williams' point, I mean, I don't think anyone on this council is trying to prevent us from being able to have the ability to have concrete delivered, especially for purposes of what York County is doing in construction. I do think that there's a hesitation to open it up because we are on the border, to be basically the concrete dumping grounds for everybody north of us. And, I mean, can we, between now and second reading, get some details? I know we talked about this at the workshop about what is it that we need as a county to be able to fulfill the needs of our county without running us into, you know, the similar situation as of the landfills and taking out-of-state waste. We certainly don't want to take out-of-state waste, and we don't want to be tearing up our roads to carry concrete across state lines.
Good point.
And one, just in addition to that, so, the staff's recommendation for, first reading, the revision was to remove AGC as a permitted district for non-metallic mineral product manufacturing. So why would, is that what
Planning
that
Commission
says?
did that.
Oh, that's planning commission?
No, that was, to clarify, that was not staff's recommendation. That was planning commission's. For the record, I'm still saying it should stay in AGC because you still have the same issue of there is very little currently zoned ID, very, very little. And with all the separation requirements, the only place open is in the western part of the county, which the future land use map shows that all is AGC. If you're saying it's only allowed in ID, somebody has to come in for rezoning, which I understand you like, but how do you then say you're following the comp plan when you're rezoning, your spot rezoning out in the western area?
I mean, it begs the question as to whether or not you need a concrete plant in the middle of AGC. And we don't, it's not appropriate to dump on the AGC areas. If there's a need for it, then there's a proper process to rezone it. But I think it creates a bigger threat to the incorporated areas of my district, which are a lot of AGC, and to Robert's district, for us to open it that wide open, to make it like that. And I would like to know, I mean, there are a ton of them coming out. I mean, there's a ton of road construction that's going on in Gastonia and in Charlotte. The point is, we want to make sure that we aren't tearing up our roads to do that work. So if there's any way that we could get some feedback from you all as to what do we need to be able to service the construction needs of York County, then that would help us be able to determine whether or not there truly is some kind of a lack of ability to meet the needs of our construction industry.
We can do what we can to provide what information would be available, but the market dictates most of that. And for us to put our fingers on the pulse of that market, I don't know how accurate we would be because we're not in the concrete plant business. We're just trying to provide an avenue for businesses such as concrete plants to exist in this county if in fact the market dictates that it's needed there. And so I'll be glad to look into that particular question between now and second reading, work with economic development or whomever else we may need to get some clarification on that. But largely, in my estimation, that's a market question.
How many concrete plants do we have in York County right now?
I don't know.
It's
I
very
could
few.
find out.
We looked that up when this whole thing started. I don't know right off the top of my head what that is, but I can provide that fairly quickly.
It seems like we should know that.
And I just want to say, I understand and I understood in the workshop, staff's recommendation is not to take out AGC. But I represent the largest area of AGC in the county. And I have issue with it just being a permitted use in basically my entire district. And that's why I've supported taking it out. I've been very upfront about that all along. I know it's not what staff recommends, but that's the only way I will vote for this if AGC is not a permitted use.
But
It could be a special exception. Does staff have a problem with that?
It is presented as a special exception. The only other alternative I can provide is, I understand, I am listening loud and clear to that AGC. I mean, it's not a recommendation I made lightly, but when we did the maps and we ran all the scenarios and you're looking at the available land for a concrete plant, it becomes very, very limited. The only other option I can do is to direct staff to go back and maybe change those minimum separation requirements, come back and maybe not use the airport overlay as a separation, maybe not use the scenic overlay, because that takes a wide swath of land.
Well, I think the definition of scenic means you don't pull it from scenic, but, I agree with Robert, you know, I'm the one that asked for this, and my ultimate goal was to not just have a concrete plant anywhere somebody wanted to put a concrete plant, to make it a special exception so that the county has a say when somebody wants to, and I think that should be the same. It doesn't matter what the zoning is, it's a special exception, which means some might be approved in agricultural and some might be approved in.
That is true, but with what the ordinance is and with the available industrial currently zoned, you will experience rezoning requests with a special exception, which I understand is fine. But based on the separation, there is almost no land to request a rezoning to industrial.
What I think she was saying to this,
You rezone it.
there's some confusion here under the staff thing.
It's not worded
It says remove AGC as a permitted district, which makes it look like it is permitted for a concrete plant. If it is a special exception in AGC,
Yes.
I'm thinking there might not be near as much heartburn with Mr. Winkler, or still gonna be heartburn, but not as much. She was saying that it needed to have a say.
I mean,
I would have a problem with, pending ordinance document, I'd have a problem removing it at all, but I don't have a problem moving it forward if it remains a special exception.
oh,
I'm curious, yeah. I get this debate, the AGC and the ID. And I brought this up at the workshop. I don't understand how we would ever even want to consider pushing concrete plants out to AGC where there is no infrastructure. There is nothing there. The roads can't handle the heavy trucks. There's not all of the things we're going to require, the electricity, the water out in most of the parts of this county. They're not even there. So to exclude AGC is logical to me because I don't want it out there. That's not where I want this. I want this in industrial areas. So I guess that is, and I get the whole idea, but when you remove AGC, you just took it off the plate in the county. I get that too, but it seems to be a double-edged sword. It seems strange to me that we would ever want it to go to AGC anyway. Or was that just the default zoning? At that point, it was like, there's no other place left except to put it in AGC.
It actually came up before in District 5, where a gentleman had AGC zoned property just last year, and the only district that would allow it was ID. So staff was kind of on the horns of a dilemma of, okay, we're not opposed to the concrete plant, but we really don't want to rezone it to ID because that's really not appropriate. So it does come up, and I understand your point, that if you're telling me you don't want to ban concrete plants and you still want to allow it,
You got to be.
the separation will preclude rezoning to ID and even allow the special exception. You've said you have to be this far from all of these things. So the only place left, and it was wide open, white, was the western part of the county. So then staff is sitting here with a recommendation of, well, if I don't say something, that means people may come in and request an ID rezoning for an area you don't want it. And so the compromise in my mind was, well, at least leave the zoning as AGC and just allow it as a special exception instead of making all these little ID pockets.
That Christie and I shared that rezoning, we bumped into each other right there. And to me, that is the exact reason we need it to be rezoned, because if it was allowed in AGC, we'd have had no control, and there'd have been one out there in the middle of somewhere where I don't believe it belonged in the first place. So I think that's why we needed to be able to not have it as a permitted use.
as I understand it right now, concrete plants are only allowed in ID.
And
anyway.
ID and UD.
Well, UD we're getting rid of. So we aren't creating any bigger problem by simply requiring special exceptions. That's all we allow right now. We're talking about, are we going to open it up to a whole new world of possibilities that didn't exist before us now? I
But-
just don't see how.
But the issue is you don't have a minimum separation requirement, so you have a lot more available land to theoretically rezone to ID.
So so at second reading, once we get some information from you, we can look at different setback requirements. I mean, but to open it up to a whole new area, that's a huge amount, to me is a problem.
Well, let me clarify something from my understanding of this, although I'm not going to support it. Taking it from permitted use in ID, which makes sense, to now making that a special exception in ID, what exactly does that incur?
That's not the issue. The special exception, that's not a problem. That, I could recommend that. That is not the issue. The standard, though, is it's a 500-foot separation from all the residential rezoning districts, all the overlay districts. That's really it's not the special exception, it's that standard that is then gonna very much limit where you can even say you're gonna rezone a property.
Is that not what was recommended to us in the workshop?
The consultant did what you asked them to do, came up with standards. I'm not saying the standards in the perfect world are unreasonable. What we as staff and Andy and I look at is what is the impact of that standard? And we're saying with our recommendation, I'm fine with the special exception, I'm fine leaving it in ID, but that, with the separation standard, I'm telling you, there's really no available land that you will have a concrete plant.
But here's the problem, as I see it. You live in Pleasant Ridge, or you live in Beacon Knoll, you have an ID area backing up to you.
Right.
The last thing I would want, and if I'm living in one of those neighborhoods in the Fort Mill area, is a concrete plant coming literally across the creek from me, and just a 100-foot wooded area, and all of a sudden now I have a concrete plant. I think I agreed with the 500-foot separation from residential, because I thought that was an important thing to move these away from homes. No one, obviously, you talked about, somebody said it before, when we were talking about another thing with the connector roads. Well, nobody wants that through their neighborhood. Well, nobody truly wants a concrete plant parked right beside. It's one thing if you move to the concrete plant, I don't feel sorry for you. But if you're there and just because the luck of the draw put it there, but allowed it to come there, that's where I have, we should create an atmosphere where we are trying to put some distance between someone living in their house and someone putting in a concrete plant. And I thought the 500-foot separation was good. Now, I don't specifically, maybe we could go look at some of the special districts as you've recommended, possibly looking at one of those and seeing if that makes the map better. But I'm struggling with allowing it in AGC, and I'm also struggling with ever removing the 500-foot separation for residential. And I'm also trying not to outlaw concrete plants. It seems silly that we would even debate that.
Well, I think that's going to be the end result, but anyway, Mr. Roddy.
I think the only way for us to move forward is staff's gonna have to come back and give us a much smaller area for separation, because the 500 takes so much land off the books to be able to do it. We don't wanna open it up to AGC, so we can't get both with the 500. If you reduce the 500, it opens up more land that could possibly be used for a concrete plant, because you don't wanna do something that's gonna severely restrict where it can go. And like you're saying, that with 500, it's basically taking, with the 500 feet separation, you're basically taking it off the chart to where you're not gonna have anything, anywhere to put it. So I see the problem with that. So if we reduce the restriction and still make it a special exception in ID, that would open up a little bit more land versus totally taking it off the books, right?
Yes.
So that's, basically, I guess going forward, we're gonna have to get a smaller separation. Otherwise, we gotta open it back up to AGC.
I think we may not have to reduce the separation, but if I had some flexibility of not doing churches and daycares and some of these overlays, I don't see why we're separating on the airport overlay district. The FAA kind of works with the airport on height and all of that, and that could control on that. again, some of these, I understand the scenic overlay, but maybe the more important thing is through chapter 155, just say it can't go within the scenic overlay, because that's a mile. I mean, that's a mile around the things you're trying to buffer, plus an additional 500 feet. So I think that's a little excessive there. So that's the recommendation I would make.
Mr. Johnson?
Let me ask you, before, a few minutes ago, we were talking about special exception. You said that one of the criteria is you have to be able to walk in the door and show that you have a hardship
That's for a variance.
for a variance.
Yes.
That's not for the actual special exception.
Right.
And I don't have a question.
Mr. Weed?
The distance requirements, if we left in AGC as in there as a special exception, would you still need to change the distance requirements?
I would not. It would make the land more available, but I agree. I'm trying to allow some land, but I agree with everyone else on you really don't want to push it out to AGC. So
No, I agree.
So if you were asking me to make a recommendation on that point, I would say direct staff to maybe try some different scenarios with the separation and leave AGC alone and out of it.
I would feel better with that, and I agree. I mean, airport overlay, why?
Yeah.
That's an industrial area around the airport anyway. Why do we?
So now we need to defer this until staff, if that's the direction people
Can we
want to
not
go.
pass
I
first
think we
reading
should
and?
pass it. and
Not,
make
not,
it-
not if it's gonna invoke, not if it's gonna invoke public hearing, not if next hearing is
Pending.
gonna be public hearing, it's gonna invoke pending ordinance.
Right, as soon as you give notice of a public hearing, it's in effect. So that doesn't mean the public hearing, it means 4 days from now, boom, in effect.
So,
So
Michael,
there is no way,
is that
even if I
accurate?
agreed with the,
We can't make any changes if we invoke pending ordinance doctrine? We can't adjust the.
You can
the set-
adjust it with the pending ordinance
Okay.
doctrine,
But it's still in
what's
effect until you
what's
make
in
the
place,
adjustment.
That's correct.
yeah, so,
Okay.
everybody good? So here again, I'm not gonna support it since it goes into effect. Pending ordinance, I think, is a wrong thing to ever do, but especially something like this. Question on the motion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no? No.
No.
4-3.
Ayes.
Well,
I'm a no.
4-3 accounts.
okay, let's do a count. Those in favor of the motion?
4-3.
Those opposed? Okay. Next item, council to consider first reading of an ordinance to amend the York County Code of Ordinances, Chapter 155 zoning code, so as to reclassify mining to major resource extraction and minor resource extraction based on size of operation and duration, to provide for regulatory provisions related thereto, to amend the definition and use table in order to establish the uses and provide for the districts in which they are allowed or removed, to establish major and minor resource extraction as a special exception uses in AGC and ID, to establish only minor resources extraction as a special exception in AGC 1 LI, and to remove all reference to mining in RUD and UD making it a prohibited use, to amend supplemental regulations in AGC, AGC 1, ID, and light industrial in order to address items such as hours of operation, dust reduction measures, adoption of a performance standards agreement, development of an access and routing plan, a fencing plan, and end-use plan, and proof of other required permitted approvals, and where applicable, provide for separation requirements, setbacks, screening, an operations plan, and limit extension provisions, and to provide for other matters related thereto.
Move to approve, subject to the planning commission recommendations as listed by the staff's response, and changing the mining definition. Do I need to read all that? The mining definition, or is that good enough?
Mike?
Basically excluded grading from the process.
Michael?
I think you should hit the highlight of
Okay.
your.
Is there a second before I read?
Second.
The current definition
Yeah,
starts out,
Well, as the expert on this, and for what Mr. Johnson was pointing out that I was getting ready to say, you can't really have a second until you have the whole motion.
no, I did. This is clarifying it, but okay.
Well, I mean, okay, whatever term.
This is what the planning commission recommended. And this is how staff said to handle it. Mining, the process or business of extracting ore, minerals, sand, gravel, stone, clay, and/or dirt from the earth's surface, including borrow pits and/or sites. Ponds are not subject to mining requirements as herein written. And the following sentence will be added after that. grading activities associated with permitted construction and development of a parcel or parcels and not for commercial operation whose primary purpose is to sell dirt, sand, or clay for profit are not subject to mining requirements. The following sentence is removed. Ponds must be directly supplied by a perennial stream, or the design must be reviewed and recognized by the Natural Resources Conservation Service as a pond with a good probability of maintaining a high water level.
Okay, and just for protocol, let me have that second again.
Second.
Thank you. Discussion.
So one of the questions
Ms.
here was the,
Love.
one of the questions here was the identify hours. To- the- From last time. For blasting, yeah, the hours for blasting, yeah. So what do you think?
What, you're asking Andy? What?
I'm asking,
Now, we just made a motion with the planning commission recommendation. There was a council discussed revision. They were talked about limited hours, and she's asking.
yeah,
should
so
we
the
add
motion
that?
will need to specifically identify the limited hours for blasting.
What, just, and, because we did this 6 weeks ago, what are the hours for blasting right now?
Anytime they want.
Unlimited?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it needs to be kind of in line with the apple picking.
Blow the apples right out of the tree.
10 till.
Windy Hill apples
blasting.
are the bomb.
Staff's response to that was hours of operation as proposed are 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Council may choose to restrict blasting time specifically, or council may request the proposed ordinance be modified to require the applicant for a special exception to specifically state blasting will be needed, and the ZBA may restrict hours of operation further to mitigate impacts. I'm guessing that means that right now it's 7 to 7 is when you can blast if we don't change it.
Actually, you said you can blast anytime right now if we don't.
No, that was, this is, it's in the memo to council. Yeah, they-
Though, not to say that, maybe I'm,
says hours of operations as proposed are 7 a.m. to 7 p.m.
Andy, you want to give
It's on
clarification?
page-
So we don't
As
debate it up
proposed,
here.
meaning that's what
Just can you
we
give us a
already
straight
talked
answer through the concerns?
I mean,
I guess the recommendation now is, I'm looking back at Audrey, there's not a time, a sunset or a sunrise on blasting as it stands now.
Currently, for mining
Right.
operations, we don't address blasting. And you're both correct. In the proposed revisions, there's a 7 a.m.
Okay.
to 7 p.m. for all mining activities. Council raised the issue that you thought maybe blasting at 7 a.m. may be a little too early. And so I just raised the issue. If that's something you want to address, we need it in the motion.
I think maybe 8 to 7. But Sundays, can they blast on Sundays too?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, as proposed, there's no limit on the days of the weeks. It's just the hours.
It'll be in lieu of church bells.
So who made the motion?
I made the motion.
So are
I
you
made the
changing
motion.
anything?
So, yeah.
Yeah.
No, Chad made the motion.
So the first motion.
Don't you remember? Where you been?
So is
No wonder you quit.
there any better words
I
never
think
been-
we could.
better words
I think
never
we
been
could-
spoken.
I think we could add that as second or third. I don't know if you heard, I am too, so you.
No. Okay. So,
I think we could address that, but I don't have a problem taking that as a friendly amendment to change the hours from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m.
and you gave the second, right?
She
Alex?
seconded it.
Okay, so you're good with that. All right, any further discussion? Question on the motion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Next item, council to consider first reading of an ordinance to amend the York County Code of Ordinances, Chapter 155 zoning code, so as to add a new supplemental regulation section designated as Section 155.502, specifying requirements for liability agreements related to certain industrial uses, landfills, mining, and non-metallic mineral product manufacturing, to specify the purpose for the agreement, its applicability and contents, the required road construction standards to be included, the provision of a financial guarantee by the applicant, and the requirement that the agreement must be reached and executed prior to final site plan approval, to amend the individual district regulations pertaining to special exceptions in AGC, AGC 1, RUD, ID, and light industrial by adding a reference to the supplemental regulations and providing for other matters related thereto.
Move to approve.
Second.
Discussion.
Are we on the sound one?
Ms. Cox, ma'am?
We're on the sound
no,
one?
we're on 8.
Sorry.
We're on number 8.
Are we on the same?
Do we need to wait a minute?
Yeah, just say.
Okay. Anybody got anything they want to talk
I'm good with
about?
that. I'm good with that one.
Oh, you're good? Okay. Any further discussion? Question on the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Next item. Council to consider first reading of an ordinance to amend the York County Code of Ordinances, Chapter 155 zoning code, so as to amend the York County Code of Ordinances, Chapter 155 zoning code, so as to amend Appendix D, Exhibit 1, Code of York County Performance Standards Agreement to add a provision providing for notices of sound level violations to be issued to owner contractors suspected of exceeding maximum permitted sound levels, to authorize a sound study for uncorrected violations, and to require owner contractor to reimburse the county for the cost of the study if the violation is confirmed by the study, to add protections for residential properties, to correct the sound level chart, to delete the glare paragraph therein, and to provide for other matters related thereto.
This is the sound one.
Yeah,
Correct.
thanks.
You good with that, Ms. Cox? Okay.
I don't like this one.
Okay.
Gotta make sure I get that.
Do we have a motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
Discussion?
Yep.
Okay. Just one comment. Audra, did you not say that we have to add another staff person just for this? Am I never? Don't answer that, Andy.
No.
Let Audra answer.
I bet Audra's not dreaming about it.
Nobody is dreaming about you.
So did you not say that that would
I
require
think I'm
another
as
staff
red as
member?
my jacket.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I'll not put Audra on the spot.
Okay.
Some of these ordinances, this one in particular, the next one, the light one, is not without some sort of impact on staff. There's going to be, you're going to be asking staff to gauge decibel levels or gauge lumens. Those are things that we think that are going to be beneficial to the community. I mean, these are not bad ordinances.
Right,
The
right.
Staff
I'm
recommendation
with
is
you.
fine. However, they're not without an impact on staff, and there's going to be certain levels of expertise that are going to be required either of staff or us to go find somebody.
So yes, it's probably going to add a line item for staffing.
Maybe. I don't know that that's it's not a full-time job.
Okay.
However,
Doesn't-
Light and sound guy.
Doesn't this fix,
Okay.
doesn't this help? I mean, the part of the ordinance that we have now is so hard to enforce that,
it's virtually unenforceable.
so that adds more staff.
Sure it does.
At least that if we actually tried to enforce it.
Right.
This helps clear that up.
Okay, any other discussion?
it's-
Yes, Mr. Roddy.
I know we're making a lot of changes to some ordinance and putting some stuff in place, and I guess my personal question now is, are we experiencing a lot of sound issues? Are we experiencing a lot of light issues that make us want to get to this point? Or is it just solely just for future planning? Because I know if people watching at home, they're probably wondering, what is going on? Are we getting a lot of noise, or are we getting a lot of complaints on residential lights, commercial lights? Kind of frame the whole purpose of all of this, what we're doing here tonight.
Sure, and specific to both of those questions, Mr. Roddy, the sound one does come up from time to time, but to Mr. Williams' point, it's virtually unenforceable. This provides a metric by which both your planning staff and the general public has a road by which they can travel on. They're between the lines. Same thing with the lighting. The lighting came up as a result of the Lake Wiley Park that we are currently working on building, and the impact that ambient light could have on adjacent neighborhoods. Right now, we are advocating, and as the ordinance in front of you exhibits, we want and we think that some sort of dark sky lighting is appropriate and would not only allow for the use, but to protect the neighbors as well. So both of these are in general designed to give the user a way to operate, and then the neighbor that may be affected some protections and safeguards.
I mean, you know, you've been here as long as I have. I know that we've dealt with this before, lights for big commercial complex, or this one, the sound levels, which is kind of just gives some teeth. Back when we had concrete plants where we could build these buildings, but that's another story.
So you're in favor of this? You're in favor of this?
Yeah.
Really?
Chrissy just made up her mind.
I don't like this one. I think sound, the whole sound, authorize a sound study might be the part that gets me on this one. And I just don't see people out checking the sound. I mean, somebody, you know, if there's sound now, they call the sheriff's department goes out and they, you know, turn the music down. I don't know what other example.
This is not addressing residential neighbor noise, this is more construction and business, right? This is not me calling calling the cops on Christie because she's partying and the music's too loud. This doesn't address that.
Does it not?
I think it
I mean,
addresses both.
it's going to,
I think it addresses both.
deal with everything.
Because I asked a question at the workshop as to how do we now determine, how do we give someone a ticket for loud noise at a house? We don't have any mechanism to do
This is just for
that.
the industrial and commercial uses.
Yeah.
This is not
Yeah, I mean-
for,
This is not for residential.
this is not for your parties.
No, it's not.
Right, for residential, you can always call up the law enforcement.
Yeah.
If you say they're too loud, they're gonna come out and say it's after 11.
Yeah.
Shut it down. They
Yeah,
won't
so
have a
this doesn't
decibel
address
meter or anything.
residential. This commercial.
I have heartburn on this one, especially without kind of understanding how much of a need it is. We have so many other ordinances that we've needed to pass. This one doesn't seem like we've had a whole lot of folks screaming, but we've got this one before us. I guess I'm gonna move forward with first reading, but I've got real reservations about it. I'd like to know what cost it would be to enforce this and
We're gonna
how
get some
many
meters.
folks were.
We gotta get meters.
Yeah, I'd like to know what the cost is before second reading.
Okay,
I'd just like to have an example of when it would be, I mean, give me an example, something in the last month or two that we would have
We
used
should have
this
been
for.
writing a fine for or a ticket, and we couldn't because
question on the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Next item, council,
put me for
did you get that? Okay, council to consider first reading, huh? What?
I'm talking to myself.
Okay. Council to consider first.
Tell yourself.
You got one dreaming and one.
No.
You're right, it's annoying.
I think our chair and vice chair are having mental issues.
Okay, yeah. Council consider first reading of an ordinance to amend the York County Code of Ordinances, Chapter 155 zoning code so as to provide for and establish a new outdoor lighting requirements section to amend the definition section to include fixture, foot candle, fully shielded glare, Kelvin, lamp, light trespass, lumen, luminaire, outdoor lighting, seasonal lighting, security lighting, and sky glow to establish and add the outdoor lighting standards for the county and designated purposes of the standards, their applicability to new construction, to provide for exceptions, to require an outdoor lighting plan, to establish a 5-foot setback, shielding requirements, appropriate lighting levels, maximum light levels at property line, to establish correlated color temperatures of installed luminaries, to designate special use requirements associated with outdoor recreation, canopies and parking structures, and outdoor sales lots, to recommend dark sky approved fixtures, and to establish nonconformities subject to declaration as public nuisances requiring correction, to amend section 155.594 application for zoning compliance, to add requirements for outdoor lighting plan, and to provide for other matters related thereto.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Discussion. Question on the,
Can I have a
Yes, sir.
amendment to add the effective date of the ordinance shall be 60 days from its adoption?
Yeah.
I would agree to that.
okay, that's in the motion. Discussion. Question on the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Next item, committee reports. Finance and Operations, Honorable Chairman Michael Johnson.
Finance and Operations Committee met today at 5:30. We considered applications for service for 4 boards and approved the following: Keep York County Beautiful, April Hershey, Melody Curse, and Marilyn Hakeem, all at large. Hospitality Tax, Jesslyn Anderson, District 4. ZBA, Derek Williams, District 4. Disability and Special Needs, Patricia Myers, District 3. Denise Cobb, District 5. Kyle Christopher at large, and the other at-large position withdrew his application, so we have left that open for now. So there is an opening on disability and special needs, if you know it.
That's in my district, right?
No, it's at large.
Oh,
It's
at
at
large,
large.
okay.
That's
I
the
know,
at large.
Yeah, I need some,
So which one did you,
yeah, I need.
Daniel Hill, which one's
They're
approved?
both at large.
Yeah, but which
Both-
one's?
Kyle
approved?
Christopher was approved, Daniel
Okay.
Hills withdrew his
All right.
application. That's
it?
all we,
Okay.
and then we had a brief discussion on finances.
Next item, council member, new non-agenda comments. Any council member have any concerns, comments?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir, Mr.
We'll start with
Was
Rob.
that? Oh, he's good. Okay.
Just quickly to let council know, I was asked to attend a meeting last week with representatives of the city of York and the York School District, and there is approximately 358 acres on the other side of Alexander Love Highway that is up for sale, and it is under a land conservation easement at this point, and the gentleman has had second thoughts about whether or not he wants to sell it and have it developed and whatever, and so he's looking for someone to partner up and buy this $4 million worth of property or whatever and use it for a park or something. So I attended and I was asked pointedly what I thought council's appetite would be for county putting some money in to buy that when the land use restrictions allow only passive outdoor activity, no parking, no paving of any more than an acre of property and all of that. So I told them, my personal opinion was that the council probably would not have much appetite for doing anything with that, so.
Any other, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Roddy?
Just wanted to bring everybody up to speed. I know we all supported the BMX World Championships last year that came to Rock Hill, and we graciously gave a good supporting financial input on it.
300,000, I think.
It was 300,000 to help Rock Hill put on the BMX World Championships. You know, we heard how great the event was on the local level. We heard the exposure we got on the national level, across the world and all that. But when you get down to the nuts and bolts and start looking at what we spent out in resources and what impact it made on our county restaurants as far as H-Tax and all, I had the information pulled from 16 and 17 for the month of July. And actually, the receipts didn't go up in 17. The receipts actually went down in 17 from the impact from the H-Tax. So I know we all like to track, you know, our rate of return on what we help push, how we make investments throughout the entire county with some of our H-Tax funds. But I just wanted to bring everybody up to speed on that one. We saw a 4% reduction for the month of July in 17 versus what we saw in 16, the year that we didn't have the BMX World Championships. So just wanted to bring everybody up to speed on that, and I know we're starting to look at things a lot more closely on how we kick out some of this H-Tax money and some of the rate of return that we're getting and the impacts that we're making. So I just wanted to share it. I tried to send an email when I got here this evening, but apparently it didn't connect to the internet. So as soon as I walk out the building and get home, it's probably gonna come out, and you guys can see exactly which restaurants and what they did and how they played a part in this return.
Thank you, Mr. Roddy. Anybody else? Okay, next item is citizens' concerns. David, is that Glissette? Did I?
It's pronounced two different ways. In French, it's pronounced cliché, and in English, it's pronounced clisette, rhyming with audio cassette.
So, and just name and address for.
And I generally prefer to be called by the French pronunciation,
Gotcha.
David Clissé.
So I'm gonna give you up to 15 minutes if you need it.
That's very kind, thank you. My name is David Clissé. I'm a new resident of York County. I've been here since October of last year. I'm relocated from Florida, where I lived for over 40 years.
Need your address.
Pardon me?
Your address.
My address is 1059 Peachtree Lane in Fort Mill. I have the privilege of having worked in the design and engineering and architecture industry in Florida for many years, and had the privilege of working on a variety of historic preservation projects, including the Ybor City State Museum and Fort Zachary Taylor in Key West, where we were able to restore the building and confirm that it was capable of standing. Although that's not the real point, I do have a passion for design and architecture and architectural history, and some coursework in those areas. And I currently work for a local custom home building firm that is one of the newer additions to the region, who's centered in Pineville and has offices, been very successful over a number of decades in Florida, and now just recently relocated to help the Pineville office of that company called Arthur Ruttenberg Homes. I work for them as a senior designer. But that's not my purpose here today. none of that really matters. What really matters is the future of York County and the value of what we can create here and build here. I've fallen in love with this place. It's just so awesome. We'd spent Friday night downtown Fort Mill this last weekend with my wife, and it's so beautiful what's going on there, restoration and the revitalization. It's really powerful. But I come here actually as a peacemaker. At least that's my goal. I believe probably the most perfect, or perhaps the only perfect person to ever set foot on this planet is known to have said, "Blessed are those who have a humble spirit, for they shall inherit the earth." And he also said, "Blessed are the peacemakers." So my goal here actually today is to inspire you to be peacemakers in this situation of the conflict between Morning Star Ministries and the tower that's never been completed and York County. I know that there's no easy way to resolve that tonight, but I want to introduce some concepts that may be inspirational to you. I brought some photographs of historic buildings that were abandoned and then revitalized and have now become iconic buildings. I don't know how many of you are familiar with, I thought that you would have, I've done this kind of presentation before in other venues in Florida, so I only brought 8.5 by 11, but this is a world famous Don Cesar Hotel in St. Pete Beach. You can see it's a huge building in the middle of very, very low-rise buildings, which is exactly the same condition we have in Fort Mill with the Heritage Tower. This is another building, and I'll tie these all together in a minute. This is another building in downtown St. Pete. This is an iconic building called the Vinoy Hotel. These are historic buildings, and what's unique about them, and similar to what's happened at Morningstar, this is one called the Florida Inn Hotel. This is the first high-rise building ever built in the state of Florida. It's been reported that the person who was the job captain for this building being construction, which was the same person who supervised the Empire State Building. This is the next building that he built. It was the first one completed of its style in Florida. What's unique about all of these is that they've been restored and they're now currently iconic buildings. They were all abandoned at one time, some of them inhabited by homeless people, and that's what ties them all together and why I'm presenting them today. The other thing is what's very unique about the Heritage Tower is that it's a high-rise building in the middle of low-rise. But in terms of its future value to the community and to the region, it's the only building that's in our county and between here and Columbia, South Carolina, that have the potential to give such an awesome view, the gorgeous view of York County, which I believe is stunning. I've never been up there, I haven't seen it, but I believe it's a huge opportunity to create something of great value and to draw people here. And this is a picture of the only high-rise building in the city of Paris. The city of Paris has actually been created to be a 5-story historic preservation district. This one building is the only one in historic Paris, but it's iconic. And people, the first time I got to go, somebody told me, you have to go to the Tour Montparnasse, it's the Montparnasse Tower. And the beauty of it is that there's actually a restaurant on the top floor, and then above that, an observation deck. It's about 50+ stories. And the restaurant is called Le Ciel de Paris, which means the heaven of Paris. And I believe we have the opportunity to create a similar type of environment, kind of like the heaven of York County on the top of Heritage Tower, and that the potential is there. The other thing to reflect on, obviously, is that the Morning Star Ministries, who were able to rescue that building and restore it to its current use, which is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week if you ever want to stop by there. It's really, they've taken that building from having been abandoned for 7 years to being an awesome, internationally attractive conference center, Christian conference center, with a ministry that has a great reputation and has been around for many years, supports ministries, independent ministries and missionaries all around the world, and they have attracted a really unique group of people into the retirement community that they've been able to create in the converted hotel from the original use. Their goal, as it's been stated, is to create a retirement center with the tower, not to make it Christian Disney World or Christian Busch Gardens, but actually to create a place for families to have a legacy.
And it keeps coming back to my mind that how beautiful it would be for people to be actually reside in such a beautiful place with such a beautiful view, and what a great memory that would make for families, and how happy families would be to have their parents be able to retire in a place that was a truly Christian community that had outreach around the world and was drawing people from around the world. Currently, as I understand it, they have conferences many times a year. They're open to many different churches, and that is the nature of their ministry, is not to be exclusive, but rather to be very ecumenical, and it's very powerful what they seem to have been able to accomplish. The reason that I have really come here today is hopefully inspire you, that they try to find a way to make peace in this situation. You know, we want to be good neighbors. I mean, I've even had the privilege of attending a prayer meeting at their new Bob Jones Prayer Center, and I just was observing, and I saw the leader praying for all the churches in the region. I was very impressed. I've never actually seen that hardly anywhere else. So that is really the beauty of the opportunity that we have. And unfortunately, I realize that you can't comment or at this point say anything about it. I'm hoping that there's some way that we can find to negotiate a good neighbor settlement, and that would be really awesome to be able to let that tower be completed. One of the things that most people may not realize is that over $100,000, it has been reported to me, was spent on x-raying the building and bringing in highly qualified structural engineers to determine that the building was totally capable of being restored at a relatively small cost. And in order to honor the tens of thousands of people who were sincere Christians who gave their money to have that building built, it would be a great honor, I believe, to them and to this community, and create something beautiful for the future. That'll be a legacy that'll be like these iconic buildings that I pointed out earlier in the presentation. I guess the simple question is, if you owned the building or your church owned the building, what would you want to see happen with it? You know, and will that inspire you somehow to find a way to be able to bring settlement to this issue and allow the responsible ministry that's currently there to complete the building and create something beautiful that's a legacy for your county and the commission. The one thing that I have heard during my career is that some attorneys are deal breakers and some attorneys are deal makers, but I'm hoping we can find some attorneys who are peacemakers, and I hope that you can find a way, and this different point of view would inspire you to take some steps to help us find a way to accomplish that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Do we have a motion for executive session?
Yes, sir. I move we go into executive session to discuss a contractual matter involving council telecast, to discuss the prospective contractual matter involving a regional area planning agreement, and to discuss another contractual matter involving the CVB.
Second.
Discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we'll break for 10 minutes and start set. We just left executive council. There's no action items. Do we have any other discussion? If not, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. We are adjourned.